Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications. Thanks for being with us.
And I'm Eileen, Rochford, CEO of the marketing and strategy firm, the Harbinger Group. Today, we are talking about something that's becoming increasingly important in the world of podcasts, which you and I know a little bit about.
A little bit.
Just a little bit. 56 episodes, I think. How to be an effective guest on a podcast. With podcasts exploding in popularity, PR experts are recognizing more and more that this is a tremendous opportunity for clients. Businesses are also recognizing this. They're launching podcasts left and right. But there is an art to being a great guest. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
That's right, Eileen. And, being a podcast guest is not about showing up and just talking. It's about providing value to listeners and making the host's jobs smooth. So let's jump right in. So the first thing is you must do your homework. I think that goes without saying, but we'll just say it anyway. You have to research the podcast and the host or hosts in our case. Understand the format, the audience, the tone of the show. This helps you tailor your message to fit seamlessly into the podcast's theme. So obviously you get a chance to be on a podcast. There are a million of them out there. We know this because we, take a look at the landscape, but you need to make sure that you're providing the information that the host or the hosts want.
Absolutely. It's interesting, this conversation today, Rob. I get to approach it both from the perspective of what you and I do in hosting the show, but also placing clients on podcasts, which we have done. I would say in the last 2 years, our volume of doing that has quadrupled. And the kind of portion of work that we're doing for clients for earned in terms of media has increased just quite a bit in terms of podcasts.
So let me ask you though, as it relates to, clients say, hey, we want to be on Good Morning America, or we want to be on the biggest things. And a lot of times, and I know that I do it, and I know that you do it, is you have to calibrate expectations. Like everything's not going to be a home run. So all of a sudden you have this whole new avenue of podcasts. And the great thing about them is, whereas you get earned media and you might be on a TV show or, radio shows, you have a little more time to talk. But I mean, ours is a 30-minute program. And this is, you can riff and make sure that we have our topics well researched and well thought out. But this is a great opportunity for them. Do those clients, when you're saying, hey, I know you want to be on the big, traditional broadcast thing or whatever, but hey, this podcast or that podcast, because you're more narrow casting now and going directly to a specific audience, that might be better for you. What do they say?
Interestingly, we often get inbound requests for podcasts. Okay. We want your client to be a guest on the show. We often are even saying no before we take it to the client. So to tell you why I'm mentioning that is it's about evaluating the quality of the program and what opportunity based on the format of the show, the style of the host or hosts, the audience who typically tunes in to that show, even the advertisers. There's all kinds of things we evaluate to see, does this meet the caliber, the quality of a place where our client would want to be? And often clients are surprised when we come to them and say, actually, this show has a reach that is large, not huge, but it's exactly the people you're trying to talk to. And you'll get 30 minutes to do that. And you'll be able to repurpose that content. So once they look at things like we show them past episodes, the caliber of guests who've been on the show, the caliber of conversation that took place on those shows, then they often start to say, okay, I get this. All right. And they say yes more often than not. But getting back to our point about research, I raised the point that, I'm coming to this conversation looking at it from 2 points, two different but very linked points of view, because I'll give you an example on the research front. We had a client who was pretty new in their CEO seat, and we were working to find the right opportunities for the CEO to talk about their personal leadership style and kind of set the tone for where they were going to be taking this company in the future. So finding places where you can do that when you're not in a big company and you're, obviously not very well known yet because you haven't been in the seat very long, it can be a little harder to find shows. But we found one that we suspected was just perfect. It's called The Corporate Competitor. And looking in the corporate competitor at the time was kind of newer, but the caliber of guests who had been booked on that show already, like the CEO of Disney. I mean, it was really incredible, the people that Don was getting on the show already at that time. He was a pretty famous sports broadcaster himself, the host. So the link in that show had to be you had a sports background of some sort in your life that you could tie to your leadership style. So our CEO had not played at the college level, but had played multi-lettered, I should say, at the high school level, a pretty competitive place. So we were able to weave it together. And the host said yes. Now the next thing was, great, let's get our podcast guest, our client, ready to be great on that show. And I'll tell you, as their representative, I easily listened to 12, 15 shows thoroughly, some of them multiple times, to get a feel for how do they run their interviews, the questions that they typically ask, quality of audio, all kinds of things. I mean, I just lived and breathed this show, for a couple of weeks before we did the prep session. So it paid off tenfold, being able to cite examples of how other guests had responded to certain types of questions, how they'd bridged, how they'd tied in their own sports experience at a younger age, even if it really hadn't been all that, air quotes, impressive in terms of competing. During the prep session with our CEO, that research paid off so greatly. And I will just say, because we're here to help people understand how to be a great guest, listening to multiple shows, of course, before you say yes to be on it. But once you have, gone all in, you're booked, and you've got a couple weeks, hopefully they're going to give you at least a couple weeks to get ready. You got to listen. You have to listen to many, many episodes, sometimes a few times, go deep into them, really pay attention. And that's going to help you build your own messaging structure, and you'll hear great techniques. And the reason why I say listen to multiple shows is listening to one is just not going to do it. Maybe that guest on that show you listened to wasn't so great. They're not going to be the best example, right? So get a nice cross-section variety, certainly of shows, maybe the last 5, the most recent 5. That's going to get you a nice solid foundation for how is that host or those hosts running the show today. So don't go too far back in, the archive. You can if you want, but certainly your most recent shows are going to be your best indication. So that is one research thing that you absolutely cannot miss. There are a number of other things as well. Look into their analytics for sure. Make sure it's worth your time. Look into how they promote it on social media, because then you'll know what kind of sound bites should you be, aiming for, so that you'll deliver the product that makes it possible for them to promote the show effectively. Just familiarity across the board. The familiarity with the hosts, their bio, their history, anything that you can learn about them that helps you make a connection. All those things are going to be really beneficial to you, showing up and being a great guest.
It's good advice.
That's the research front. Yeah. Anything you want to add on the research front, since that was our topic?
No, that's you got it. You nailed it.
The format too is key. I'll hit that for a sec. Format. Usually the host or hosts, when you've done that research and you have listened to a number of their shows, you'll get the feel for it. How many questions are they actually going to ask you within the time frame that their show typically spans? Get a feel for that. Say it's 5 questions, for example. Don't be afraid to ask your host for, can you give me just a general idea of what those 5 questions will be? We had a situation recently where the host said, well, I don't do questions ahead of time. This is the general gist of my show, and I get on and just have a conversation. So we had to listen to a lot more shows to get a feel for the kinds of questions that the host will normally lead guests through, and kind of group them thematically, and then prepared our client based on that even deeper research. So you really do have to familiarize yourself, because the last thing you want to do is show up and just not be ready to deliver the messaging that you're really eager to have the listeners hear, right? That's a biggie.
Well, and if you're going to if you're going to prioritize your messages, if you know they're going to ask 4 or 5 questions, you don't need to come there with, listen, you need to be ready for anything. That's clear, but you don't need to come up with your 15 best points. You need to come up with your absolute 3 to 5 winners, and you stay on message. And, and here's the other thing too, we're, asking people to come on our program from time to time. We have guests probably every second or third time, and and I think it's going to get into a little bit of what we're going to talk about here in a second about communicating beforehand. But we're not catching anybody off guard. We're not, and furthermore, you need to have a little bit of a roadmap. But before we go down that road, I think we do want to talk about like the importance of communicating beforehand.
That's right. And that is our next step. So what we recommend is, even if they don't offer it, ask for and secure a pre-interview chat, or at a minimum, an exchange of emails, because you need to discuss the topics you'll cover and the key messaging that you want to convey. So it's a two-way street, right? You want to hit both of those things. So this, as you can imagine, this doesn't just help you. It really, really helps the host. It makes sure that you guys are on the same page, and totally ensures that your conversation is smoother and more focused. And that just makes for a better show, as you can imagine. But as it relates to this podcast, you guys may not know this, listeners, but we do that every single time before we have a guest on our show. Rob and I have pre-interview, right? It's about, I don't know, Rob, would you say 15, 20 minutes?
15. It's not much. I mean,
not much, not a lot of time commitment there. But after Rob and I have done our research on the guest, formed our own picture of, here's what we think would be really interesting to talk about based on their expertise. We bring that together in a pre-conversation, make sure everybody feels good about it, make any edits that are needed based on the guest's expertise, because obviously we're going to listen to them in any show that you're on. You'd hope that the host would do the same. So you book that, I don't know, Rob, I think at a minimum, you want to book that maybe 2 weeks ahead of time if you can, at the latest.
Yeah, we usually do like a week to 2 weeks, depending on schedules.
Because then the host needs to take the information, craft the outline for conversation. So again, we're mirroring back to our guests. Here's what to expect. Here's the cadence, the flow. Of course, there's a lot of freeform that goes on, but we want to hit these questions, if possible, in the order that we've structured. But if not, because we go in a few different directions, that's okay. We can bring it back around. But everyone has a clear picture ahead of time of what we're going to do. So we always have a pre-interview. And another nice thing about the pre-interview is use the same tech. Use the same, in our case, meetup format. We use Zoom. So the pre-interview is done in the exact same environment. Everybody can test their microphones, their headphones, their backgrounds. Everything looks good. So we know on recording day, we're all set. So the pre-interview is essential.
Yeah. And the thing about it too, and you talked about having sort of an outline. For us, it's very helpful because they're doing us favors to say, here's what we want to talk about. Here's why we're asking you to be on the show. And it's usually not a mystery. But how can we frame the conversation that's going to tee it up for you, Mr. or Mrs. Guest? I mean, so that's the question. Like, how do we get into these topics that will help you be able to clearly articulate your most important points? And so while we have an outline of, okay, here's what's next, because you got to know what's next. We have it right here today on every program.
Yeah. That just makes for a smooth show. Yeah.
Right. The magic is after it's like, all right, here's the next thing we're talking about. And then it's the discussion part. I don't know what's coming. I don't know I kind of know what the answer is. I know you do too. We don't know exactly, but that's where the magic happens. But there is structure to it, and there needs to be structure to it. And the more you communicate in general, but certainly for this exercise, the more you communicate, the better program, the better podcast you're going to have. No question.
Yep. Absolutely agree with you. I think the magic often comes within the structure, because when the guests give us their stories, their examples, this happened to me, here's how I handled it, here's what came out of it. Those moments, those are just pure learning, magical exchanges. So that's another bit folks should always remember. You're not just there to state facts. You're there to paint a picture with your words for your listeners, and that comes through the stories and examples.
That's a great segue, because that's what we're talking about is the storytelling. I mean, you're sitting there, you're being interviewed, and it's like you want to impart information, that's fine. But being able to share anecdotes, personal experiences, and real life examples related to the subject at hand that day, it not only engages the audience, but it humanizes you as a guest as well. So, I mean, I think no no matter what we do in this communication consulting world, we always preach like, you got to tell a story. You got to tell an interesting story. You have to be compelling. And when you can sit there and impart information, like I said a second ago, but you can also do it by telling a story and people and hook people with that, it's just going to make for a better experience. No question.
Yeah. And we have had some guests on our show who have done a phenomenal job of that. And it was clear that they thought about it in advance. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to show up with my 5 message points, but they had built within their message points. Oh, here's an awesome example of when that happened to me, or what we did on behalf of a client and how that changed the game, right? Or how I, as a CEO, handled a situation and it turned out terribly and I regret it, but they're honest and real about it. And it's the sharing of those concrete examples. And sometimes I think some of our guests didn't expect to share to the degree that they did, but it turned out to be really powerful, the exchange. So don't be afraid. I think my point here is don't be afraid to also, go off your own script too. If it feels right and you're comfortable and something comes to mind, an experience that's very relevant and you are okay with sharing it, go for it. It's just going to make you as a guest even better, in my opinion.
Yeah, because you may be guarded about certain things, or your personality may be that in general. But I think when people take chances, and I think you were talking about our guests, I think when our guests have done that, they're like, oh, that felt good. That was really good. I took a chance, and I was, first of all, being able to take a peek behind the curtain and just getting like, why did you do that? What were you thinking? Things of that nature that you typically wouldn't get. That's the good stuff, I think. When you can have that discovery that was something maybe you didn't anticipate. That's where the magic is.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So don't feel like you got to keep yourself in a tight box in a podcast. I think often people listen to podcasts because they'll experience that spontaneity that they wouldn't get in another format. So bringing that is a really good thing. So be ready for that. It might just strike you and take advantage. So it's as we're on this topic of it's about connecting with your listeners. There's another point that's very important. I think that everybody listening, if you want to become a better podcast guest, should pay close attention to. And we talked about familiarizing yourself with the format. Well, the format is one thing. The length of the show is another. And the reason why I mention this is because if you're on a show that's 30 minutes, that's not a long conversation. It's a good amount of time, but it's nowhere near as long as you think it is. So practice being concise and to the point and tight in your storytelling. That's another tip that we'd like to convey today, because time is definitely of the essence in a podcast. And people get a little, distracted and maybe will hit fast forward a lot in their listening if they're not hearing what they're expecting to listen or hear. Based on the description of the show, right? So remember, to some degree, you got to stay on topic, even if you are struck by the urge to be spontaneous. Make sure it's linked to the topic of the show and that you are concise and tight in your delivery.
Well, I think, and this is another moment where people like us, I always consult with clients, and I know you do too, about, it's not just, it's beyond the elevator pitch, but if you're interesting enough and you have a tight message and you share something with me, that may lead to like 3 or 4 other little questions in the real discovery that we were talking about a second ago. If I ask you a question and you go on for 3 to 5 minutes, not only are the people like they're hearing the same voice, they're going to be fast forwarding, they're going to disengage. It's not going to make for a very good show. I think maybe, and we've had some wonderful guests on this program early on. And I can't even remember who it was, but if I could, I wouldn't say who it was, but it was like question, 3 to 5 minute answer. And it's like, oh, no, we can't do that. You have to be, because the thing about it is, if you give me 30 good seconds and an answer in a podcast, that's going to spur, if we're the hosts, Eileen, so we're going to be like, what about this? What about that? And then you just go off. First of all, you get to more of the interesting stuff. But if we ask that guest a question and they go on for 3 to 5 minutes, the momentum's gone. And as a former, I've joked with you about this time and again about my years in TV gave me an internal clock. And when it starts, going off, it's like, oh my gosh, come on. It's like get to the next point.
Wrap it up. Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, please. Yeah. You're killing me here. I hear you.
So flexibility is another thing we want to talk about here. So it's good to have key messages in mind. No question. We're preaching the virtues of that right here, but also be open to the flow of the conversation. And this is sort of related to some of the things we've already talked about, which is if the host or hosts take the discussion in a slightly different direction, just go with it. So it's taking a chance. It's what do you want to convey to the audience? When you're adaptable like that, it's going to be more dynamic. It's going to be a more interesting conversation. So as we've mentioned already, we build a rundown for our podcast. So everyone knows everybody who's on it, you and me, and if there's a guest, but the magic is in the discussion. And that's where I think that we have that discovery where you really learn something interesting about the guests, but it also is them willing to pivot and say, I didn't know it was going there. So we've talked about that a little bit here, but I really wanted to kind of share that as a direct talking point here.
Yeah, great point. Always remember that your best quote could come from a question you were not expecting. So just keep your mind open to it. Definitely try not to be thrown. It's okay. We say this a lot in media training. It's okay to pause. It's okay to think on a podcast because that can be edited out. There's no danger there. Remember that you can pause, you can ask even when it's being recorded, which I think 99% of them are. You can even ask to be given the question again and answer it again if you don't like your answer. It's okay. It happens a lot.
And the other thing too, you were bringing up media training. This is not doing the media. This is not a gotcha moment. This is not, you're coming on our program and Eileen and I are going to try to trip you up and get you to say the wrong thing. Sometimes that's what media training is, looking around those corners and making sure you don't do that, correct? This is, you're doing us a favor. You're coming on our podcast. We want to make you look as good as we can. So it's kind of a different spirit. So the things you were just talking about are very relevant because I didn't get it quite right, whatever. And most of the time, I'm proud to say our guests do get it right. And if we end up having to trim a little bit for time or whatever the case may be, it's not like we have to start all over. All right, let's ask that again. Okay, let's ask this again, because that spontaneity is the magic, as I said earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So underscoring that you want to keep your open mind and answer, even if you weren't expecting the question, because I'm sure you're actually going to be great in whatever you deliver. But if you're unhappy with it, you can ask to answer again and have it edited out. It's all good. I don't think there's a podcast host in existence who would say no to that. It's very easy to do. So you have the agency to do that and should exercise it. Definitely remember that. It's a biggie. Okay, so I think this may be last but not least. We got to move on to the topic of promoting the podcast afterward.
In your networks.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that it would be worthless for you if you didn't take advantage of promoting the podcast once it goes live because you're the guest. So whether it's you or your marketing team, your individual PR person, whoever it may be, make sure you get from the show ahead of time the promotional assets so that you can review them and make sure that you're happy with everything. And if you want any changes made, just ask. We have done it for numerous guests, slight tweaks here and there, but we make the changes and we make sure that they have the material in hand that makes it possible for them to promote the show even ahead of time. A teaser. I'm going to be on the show. It's coming out on this day. I'll post it soon. Really excited to have been a guest. It was a great conversation. That kind of post is a nice tease. And then when the show is live, and even a time or two, shortly thereafter, make sure that you take advantage and share it, like I said, repeatedly on your social feeds. And if you are part of a company with a larger formal marketing structure, make sure they know about it and that they also help promote it for you. It's only good for you, really. So remember that there's all kinds of places that you can share your show. Aside from social media, if you have a newsletter, for example, include it in your newsletter. Include it as a promo on your website. There's tons of places to do it, but make sure that you share it as wide and several times as much as you can. That's what we recommend.
And I'm really proud of the team we have here that does that work, because to your point that you're making a second ago, okay, the podcast is coming up. Oh, here's a little teaser or whatever. But they're really good at taking out little bits and pieces of other parts of the conversation. It may be 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds. And it's something that you and I and our guest could promote, 3-4 days later, a week later, whatever the case is. And so the folks here at Can You Hear Me, your great Harbinger Group folks, do a terrific work and really make sure that those assets are there. So it's really easy to share. It's not like, oh, you got to go dig around for something. Oh, what was that soundbite or this or that? It's already there. And so it just gives us more muscle. We have a Can You Hear Me podcast page now on LinkedIn. You have a presence there. I have a presence there, like Facebook Professionals, another place that I go for this sort of thing. But your networks, you, the guest we're talking about, can really help us out too.
Yeah, every time. No doubt about it. Yeah. So that's a nice, polite, be a good guest thing. It's also just in your own best interest, as we said.
Of course. Why wouldn't you want to promote the fact that you were a thought leader on something?
Yeah. And may I just add one point here, because your raising of the creation of the promotional assets turned something on in my brain. And it's something that I think our listeners who want to be podcast guests would appreciate. And that is, often, even though podcasts are listened to the vast, vast majority of time, for me, I listen to them when I run. That's my favorite time to do it. So I'm not looking at people, but the promotion of your show where you're a guest is more than likely going to be done via video and audiograms that have supplemental video. Okay. So with that in mind, remember that you have to be in a good place where you're going to have good lighting. You have to have, of course, good headphones, good microphone, a room with decent sound. All of that's really, really important. But on the video front, you'll want to make sure you look as good as you would want to look when it goes out on social media. So keep that in mind too, and take the extra steps,
Did I not adhere to that today? I didn't
think you
shave, and I have a
phenomenal.
nice sweatshirt on, but it's a sweatshirt because everybody
great.
hears this. But to your point, when we do promote it, we're promoting it via video, and there are discussions about maybe we make this all video. Anyway, the other point about good microphone, good lighting, things of that nature is make sure you have a Ethernet plug-in. Like everybody, Wi-Fi is fine, but man, when you sometimes if Wi-Fi is unreliable and you get hits in it, it just hurts the quality of it. So I always have Ethernet and Wi-Fi. I'm not saying I'm never going to get knocked off. I'm saying I've done everything I can to make sure that I don't. So the quality of it is good. And to your credit and a nod to Shure microphones, because we both have them. I remember early on not having one, and you're like, we need to step it up. This is probably episode 2 or 3. We're on this is going to be episode like 58. So it really makes a difference. And I think people can hear that it really makes a difference. And sometimes we have guests that don't have that quality, and they're not required to, right?
Yeah, right.
But if you're listening to us and then you don't have it, it's noticeable.
It is. And that is another point that whenever we're encouraging our clients to become guests on a show and kind of walking them through everything, the technical aspects and everything else involved, we always say, when they say, really, I have to go get a microphone, we say 2 things. One, you don't have to, but you're going to want to. Because when you hear how good they sound and how, by contrast, you really don't sound that good, you'll be unhappy at the end of the day, and you won't want to promote the show as much, and nobody wants that. So then the second thing we say is, we're shipping you one from Amazon right now. So that they can't say,
I can't tell you how many times you're the one that turned me on to them. And I can't tell you how many times with clients and other people, and they just hear it. Like I'll say, my recommendation is to get a microphone like this. And then they hear it and they're like, oh my gosh, send me the link. I'm going to get one. Or like you said, you send it to them. So we've helped this company out a lot, but they do great work.
Well, whatever, brand you get, it doesn't matter, but just make sure it's, a higher quality microphone that has a pop filter and is positioned properly so that your audio can be picked up well. All those little things. We're going to include in our show notes today a tip sheet that runs down every single thing that we have discussed today. And we'll even have, again, Rob and I have 0 sponsors, so there are no affiliate links here happening, but we'll include links to purchase some of the equipment that we often get for our clients or recommend that they get for themselves.
We don't have sponsors, but we're not opposed to them. I just want to put that out there.
Okay. I love that. I love that you're all about that.
Very subtle.
You're all about that. That is so fantastic.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Well, I think we have definitely hit all of the high points today in terms of being the best possible podcast you can be. Final conclusion point that I'll make is if you're not looking into being a podcast guest yet, you really should be. It's the explosion of content that fits. It's narrowcasting, as you said very early on in this show, Rob, and the direct reach that you get, as well as the repurposing that you get, being able to send it out to all of your own direct audiences. It's well worth your time. We're also working with more and more brands who are clients of ours to start their own podcast now, which is another thing to consider. So anybody who's thinking about it and you have some questions, Rob and I are always happy to answer them. So you can reach us on LinkedIn. It's real easy to do so where we promote the show. Send us your questions. We're, I would not call us experts. Rob, I'm sorry. You are an expert. I'm kind of like getting there, maybe.
Yeah, I think, just the TV background, that's one thing. This is still performance. It's different, but you and I both have almost, 6 of these under our belt. So I would say we both are, I'm not saying we are the foremost experts in the entire world, but we're pretty dialed into what's going on.
Yeah. An interesting connection too, because of our communications backgrounds, your broadcast backgrounds. So happy to answer anything that you guys listeners might be thinking through. And we encourage you to do it because it would be really good for your own professional credibility and very likely your company's brand. So go for it.
And your brand.
Yeah. So that's going to do it, guys, for another episode of Can You Hear Me? I'm Eileen Rochford.
And I'm Rob Johnson. Thank you for listening. As always, you can find Can You Hear Me wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. And you can also stay updated by going to the aforementioned Can You Hear Me podcast page on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.